All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So, man, playoffs start today, right? We got the Chargers-Texans later. We got the Steelers-Ravens tonight. Man, I'm really fired up for that game. I'm hoping that the Steelers defense puts on a show and they kind of contain the Ravens offense. Obviously, last time they played, Baltimore won. But you kind of feel like Mike Tomlin has had Lamar Jackson's number, as time goes on here. But in any case, the New York Jets have added a couple of new names to their general manager list or their interview list. One name comes from Peter Schrager on a report. The other comes from the New York Jets social media page. Let's talk about it, right? So the first name up, the Jets actually just wrapped up the interview. This is not scheduled in the future. It is done. It's in the books. It's Darren Mogi from the Denver Broncos. He's only 39 years old, but he's the Broncos assistant general manager. He joined the Denver Broncos back in 2012 and really worked his way up through the scouting department, right, from that side of things. And as we all know with general managers, you typically have the player development or the player identification side, the scouting side, or that financial side, right? Both sides are very, very, very important. Yes, you can make pros and cons for both, but in this case with Darren, he's coming in from that scouting side. Now, what's interesting is, if we look at the timeline, right? Mogi Broncos 2012 was that first year, right? And by the way, he's also a former player, but 2012, that first year, and we're in 2025 now. It sounds crazy to say that, but in that span, we've seen so many different things from the Denver Broncos. We've seen them have horrible seasons. We've seen them have really, really good seasons. In fact, they actually won the Super Bowl 50, while Darren was there. So he's kind of seen, how do I build this team? How do I tear down the team? How do I build it back up? He actually has the full backing of George Payton over in Denver. And, at 39 years old, like that's obviously a pretty big accomplishment to be sitting in this seat right now. I think this is a pretty interesting one. And of course, we have to look at the connections. Whenever one person has been with one organization for such a long time, of course, you got to think, okay, who are the guys that Mogi has been around? It's not, a foregone conclusion. He must hire someone from Denver, clearly. But those guys always seem to have their foot in the door, or it could work against them, right? For example, the Jets are interested in Vance Joseph, doing great things with Denver. Obviously, the Broncos play tomorrow. Former head coach, so he has that experience. Vance is someone who obviously has been with the Denver Broncos in multiple tenures. If Mogi looks at Vance and it's just like, hey man, this he is a defensive coordinator, he is not a head coach, then we have that inside information, right? We have that behind the scenes, the behind the curtain look at these specific coaching candidates. And same can be said with Borgonzi and Steve Spagnuolo and Matt Nagy, right? You can play this game with all these different connections, right? Mike Greenberg, Liam Cohen, all these different dots that you can connect here. So that's the one interview that has already been handled. The next is coming from Peter Schrager, and it's Lance Newmark from the Washington Commanders. He's currently their assistant general manager and has spent 28 years in the National Football League, and 26 out of those 28 years have been with the Detroit Lions. He also comes from a scouting background, and from the sound of it, Washington Commanders fans really like him. What's not to like? The Washington Commanders, since this past offseason, have been killing it. They've been awesome. They've been developing players. They've been winning football games. They have the OC figured out. They have the head coach figured out. Seems like Peters is the right man for the job. I know it's early on here and things fall apart. But I mean, if you're a Commander fan, you got to be freaking amped with what you're seeing so far. Here's an interesting twist though. Could Newmark, someone who's spent so many years with the Detroit Lions, could he be the general manager candidate for a Ben Johnson in potentially Las Vegas? Right now, Ben Johnson has interest from the Chicago Bears, from the Jacksonville Jaguars, from the New England Patriots. That interview has already taken place virtually, of course. But with the Raiders, their timeline is so weird. It's so out of the ordinary here, and we have to read between the lines. Think about it. All the teams made their coaching decisions, whether it be in the middle of the season or on Black Monday. Not the Raiders. They fired Antonio Pierce on Tuesday, and after allowing him to meet with the media, I will never understand why teams continue to let this happen. But in any case, over the next 24 hours, we start getting names linked to the Raiders, guys that they have interest in, right? 4 head coaches. The first 2 coaches that they request to interview are Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. And of course, there's other names factored into the mix. Steve Spagnuolo from the Chiefs. Brian Flores is another one. Kind of have that Tom Brady, New England Patriot connection there. So, we're gathering this, this list of names here. Thursday rolls around. And then they decide to fire Tom Telesco. I was, as a Jet fan, I was kicking my feet up. I'm thinking, we're in a great position. It's only us and the Titans. And now the Raiders are in the mix, right? They're searching for a general manager. Why on earth did they make this decision on Tom Telesco after 1 season on Thursday? Why? That's just unheard of. You just don't fire a general manager. You don't fire a general manager after 1 season, right? It just does not happen in the National Football League. So we get word yesterday that supposedly the Raiders want to start on a fresh slate. They want to bring 2 guys in as a team, a GM and a head coach, 2 guys that can work hand in hand and not necessarily force a head coaching candidate that they love to work with Tom Telesco. So they basically said, hey, you know what? Let's just make the move and start from level 1 and build this thing up. I find the timing of it pretty weird that they fire the coach, they request to interview, then they decide to fire the general manager. And if Ben Johnson does not go to the Chicago Bears, if they decide to go elsewhere, or if Ben Johnson turns them down, or if the Raiders say, hey, here's a bunch of money, here's a long contract, here's maybe extra power, and you can help decide the future general manager of this Raiders team, could that be enough to lure Ben Johnson to the Las Vegas Raiders? I know not many people have kind of linked those two from the beginning, and it admittedly is kind of weird to think about because it's not like the Raiders have that franchise quarterback. The Raiders do have a lot of holes. The Raiders, aren't obviously a very good football team at this point in time. But could that power, that money, that GM decision, that Tom Brady factor, could all that stuff factor in to Ben Johnson? And I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but could Lance Newmark be the fit that Ben Johnson wants to work with, right? Someone who, again, you got to imagine that he would have power in picking, someone who he's worked with before over in Detroit, and someone who will really take his time with building this roster. You do not get the sense that if Ben Johnson is hired, that he's not going to be let go within 1 to 2 years. I mean, the Raiders have been churning through a lot of coaches. You just got to imagine that this, in this next go round, that they're going to give the next 2 candidates time to really build this thing, unless it just completely blows up in their face. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. And as always, go Jets.